For almost 2,000 years, billions of people have known the face of Jesus. But what if that face was never rooted in history? High in the Ethiopian highlands, inside an ancient stone chapel, rests a leather-bound book secured behind a locked cedar door. The monks protecting it have carefully hand-copied its pages for more than 1,600 years. The Ethiopian Orthodox Bible contains 81 books. The Protestant Bible contains 66. That difference, 15 absent books, was no coincidence. The Council of Laodicea in 364 C began the removal. The Council of Carthage in 397 C completed the process. By the time the King James Bible came off the press in 1611, the Western world had no knowledge these writings had ever existed. Ethiopia never abandoned them. And hidden inside one of those books Rome decided to remove, a text the Ethiopian Church has proclaimed during every Easter liturgy for 16 uninterrupted centuries, appears a physical description of Jesus unlike anything you've ever encountered. Not the fair-skinned, blue-eyed figure from European paintings, not the long-haired Byzantine Christ of Orthodox tradition. Something completely different. Over the next few minutes, you'll discover exactly what the Ethiopian text reveals, where it comes from, and why this description was concealed before Western Christian art ever had the opportunity to be influenced by it. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we explore what was removed from Scripture. Here's what makes this even more surprising. The primary source is the Mashafa Berhan, which translates as the Book of Light. It's among the texts preserved exclusively within the Ethiopian Orthodox canon. The Mashafa Berhan is preserved at the monastery of Debra Libanos, established during the 13th century in the mountains north of Addis Ababa, and in several copies throughout the Lake Tana Island monasteries, Kebra Nagast, Ura Kidane Merit, and Daga Estefanos. The text claims to preserve teachings delivered after the resurrection, including a passage where Jesus explains his own physical appearance in direct, unmistakable terms. Dr. Getachew Haile, the foremost living authority on Ge'ez manuscript traditions, based at the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library in Collegeville, Minnesota, has cataloged over 500 Ethiopian manuscripts. He has specifically identified the Mashafa Berhan as containing physical details about Christ found in no Western source. That's not a fringe claim. That's a statement from a man who has devoted 50 years to studying these texts, and here's where everything becomes unsettling. The description in the Mashafa Berhan doesn't come from a vision. It doesn't come from symbolic revelation. It's presented as a direct statement. Jesus is described as speaking about his own body in clear, straightforward language, the same tone you'd use if you were describing someone's appearance to a friend who'd never known them. Height, skin, eyes, hair, hands, every feature is presented with the same calm, precise detail the Ethiopian monks devoted to every other physical record in their liturgical tradition. It begins with height. The Mashafa Berhan says Jesus was of medium height. The Ge'ez phrase is mesate mesmer, meaning proportionate, neither tall nor short, not the imposing figure of Western religious art, not the commanding stature European painters gave him to represent divine power. Medium, ordinary, the kind of height that allows a man to move through a crowd without attracting immediate attention, which the text suggests matches how Jesus moved through his ministry without being recognized in multiple gospel accounts, but the text doesn't end there. What comes next is the description of the skin. The Ge'ez uses the word kamir, which translates as reddish-brown, or the color of ripened wheat, not white, not the olive complexion that modern interpretations sometimes attribute to Middle Eastern figures. A rich, warm brown red, the color Ethiopian monks connected with the fertile soil of the Jordan Valley. Dr. Edward Ullendorf, the Oxford scholar who devoted decades to translating Ethiopian texts, noted in his 1968 work Ethiopia and the Bible that physical descriptions in Ge'ez Christological literature consistently portrayed Jesus in shades associated with the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, not with the Mediterranean fairness of Roman painting traditions. This is not a small translation issue. Every famous image of Jesus in Western art is based on a visual tradition with absolutely no textual foundation in the oldest Christian manuscripts. The following passage is even more unusual. The eyes. The Mashafa Berhan describes Jesus' eyes as Zenibu Einato, literally beautiful in their eyes, but in Ge'ez usage, the secondary meaning is penetrating, able to see beyond pretense. The text includes a color reference. The eyes are described using a term Ethiopian scribes reserved for dark amber, the color of honey beneath shadow. Not blue, not green. Not the gray-blue that started appearing in European portrayals from the medieval period onward, an artistic convention traced directly to Rome's habit of connecting divine figures with the sky. The dark amber description matches the genetic inheritance of a first-century Jewish Galilean male and with what limited physical anthropology tells us about the population of that region during that era. Then comes the line they always leave out. The Mashafa Berhan contains a passage describing the hands. The text says the hands were ostua wetu, meaning capable, strong. The hands of someone accustomed to physical work, not the delicate, long-fingered hands of Byzantine iconography, not the pale, smooth hands of Renaissance paintings, the hands of a carpenter. Broad, weathered, the text specifies that the fingers were of medium length and that the skin across the knuckles was thickened. The Ge'ez uses a phrase that Ethiopian agricultural manuscripts applied to the hands of men who worked with stone and wood. The detail is so specific, so ordinary, that it carries the texture of memory instead of theology. The hair description is the detail that creates the greatest discomfort for anyone raised in Western Christian tradition. The Mashafa Berhan uses the Ge'ez phrase seger mezmer, hair of proper proportion, paired with the term Ethiopian scribes used to describe tightly coiled or closely curled texture. Not the long flowing hair of every European Christ. Not the loose waves of Byzantine iconography. Close, thick, the text adds that the hair was dark, the same dark the text uses elsewhere to describe the night sky in deep water. There is no ambiguity in the Ge'ez. The scribes copying this were describing something specific. They used the vocabulary they possessed for texture and color, and that vocabulary pointed nowhere near the long, straight hair filling every church in the Western world. The face is described in a single passage that Dr. Getachew Haile has called the most anthropologically detailed physical description in all of Ge'ez Christological literature. The forehead is described as broad. The nose is straight and proportionate. The Ge'ez word used here appears in Ethiopian architectural texts to mean neither prominent nor receding. The mouth is described as smeet, meaning balanced, restrained, neither wide nor small. Everything about the face description points toward moderation. Nothing within it points toward the idealized European physiognomy that became the standard image of Christ across 16 centuries of Western art. What the text explains next is the part nobody mentions. After the physical description, the Mashafa Berhan includes a brief passage explaining why the description was given, so that those searching for Jesus in crowds would not be misled by false representations. The text directly anticipates that people would attempt to portray Jesus and get it wrong. It presents the description as a correction, a document created specifically to prevent the misrepresentation that later happened anyway because the text was removed before it could shape the visual tradition in any meaningful way. What modern readers don't understand is that this description has independent support from a completely unexpected source. In 2018, a team at the University of Sheffield, led by Dr. Caroline Wilkinson, a forensic facial reconstruction specialist, conducted a study using first-century Say skulls recovered from the Galilee region of Israel to reconstruct what an average Jewish male from that time and place would have looked like. The study used computed tomography scans and forensic modeling software. The results were published by the BBC and widely circulated. The reconstructed face showed a man with dark, closely cropped hair, dark eyes, a broad nose, and brown skin in the warm to deep range, medium build, and ordinary stature. The forensic reconstruction matches the Mushafa Berhan description in every measurable category: height range, skin tone, eye color, hair texture. The Ethiopian text recorded this 600 years before forensic science existed as a discipline. In 2001, a separate study by physical anthropologist Dr. Mark Goodacre at Duke University analyzed Roman-era burial remains from the Judean region and concluded that the population of 1st century Galilee was physically distinct from Mediterranean Romans in exactly the ways the Ethiopian description suggests. Dark pigmentation, medium height, features consistent with Semitic populations of the Horn of Africa corridor. Goodacre's study made no reference to Ethiopian texts. The convergence wasn't engineered. It emerged from two completely independent lines of inquiry, arriving at the same conclusion. The suppression of this description started before the ink was even dry. The Council of Laodicea in 364 excluded texts describing the physical body of Jesus from the emerging Western canon. The theological reasoning given was that focusing on Christ's physical appearance distracted from his divine nature. But the practical effect was that Western Christianity developed an entire visual tradition: mosaics, frescoes, icons, with no textual basis for what Jesus actually looked like. Artists filled that void with the faces they recognized: Roman faces, Greek faces, the physical appearance of the people who controlled the church. By the time the Nicene tradition had become established, the image of Jesus had been completely reshaped in European terms. The timeline of this visual tradition can be clearly traced. The earliest known image identified as Jesus, discovered in the Roman catacombs and dated to around 235 C, shows a clean-shaven, short-haired young man with no halo and no flowing robes. He resembles a Roman philosopher. By the 4th century, as Constantine integrated Christianity into the Roman state, Christ began appearing in the visual language of Roman imperial authority. Long hair, a beard, an imposing presence. The visual model was Jupiter, or Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. The Roman Church gave Jesus the face of Roman power because that image communicated authority to a Roman audience. The Mushafa Berhan description, which pointed in an entirely different direction, was never included in that conversation. It had already been excluded. Jerome, working on the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, dismissed Ethiopian Christological texts as regional interpretations without apostolic authority. He didn't examine their content. He rejected their origin. Augustine of Hippo, in his City of God around 420 CE, argued that Christians shouldn't concentrate on the physical form of Christ. That argument sounds theological, but its practical effect was giving the visual tradition permission to create whatever it preferred. If the body didn't matter, then no painting could be considered wrong. The Ethiopian Church never accepted that reasoning. It preserved the descriptions. It preserved the texts. When the British military looted Magdala in 1868 under General Robert Napier and carried over 350 manuscripts back to England, some of the Mushafa Berhan copies went with them. They remain in the British Library today, catalogued but largely untranslated. Ethiopia has been requesting their return for over a century. Now, here's where everything becomes active. In 2019, the Ethiopian Manuscript Imaging Project, coordinated by Steve Delamarter at George Fox University, photographed thousands of Ethiopian manuscript pages for digital preservation. Among them were several Mushafa Berhan copies from the Lake Tana monasteries. The digital files were uploaded to a secure server for scholarly access, pending review. In 2021, a researcher studying the physical appearance passages submitted a formal request to access high-resolution images of the relevant folios. The request was routed through the Ethiopian Orthodox Patriarchate in Addis Ababa. A response arrived 14 months later. It stated that those specific folios had been flagged for restricted access, pending theological review by the Holy Synod. No timeline was provided. The researcher, whose name has not been publicly revealed, stated in a 2023 conference presentation that the restriction was applied selectively. Other folios from the same manuscript were completely accessible. Only the physical description passages were withheld. Let me be clear about something. I'm not saying the Ethiopian text is a photograph. The Mashafa Berhan is a theological document, not a biography. Its descriptions carry the interpretive weight of 16 centuries of transmission through Ge'ez scribal tradition. Details may have changed through repeated copying. The text speaks with confidence, not with the precision of modern forensic documentation. But what it describes, when read carefully in the Ge'ez original rather than through second-hand summaries, matches what forensic and anthropological science now confirms about the physical reality of a first-century Galilean Jewish male, with a precision that should not be possible for a text written 1,500 years before forensic facial reconstruction existed as a discipline. What we have to consider is the weight of the silence. Every church in the Western world contains an image of Jesus. Every one of those images comes from a tradition that had no textual foundation for the physical description it was portraying. The Ethiopian monks have been reading the Mif Berhan during Easter liturgy for 16 centuries. The description has remained there the entire time. The body the text describes, medium height, warm brown-red skin, dark amber eyes, the broad and weathered hands of a carpenter, is not the figure that appears throughout Western churches. The manuscripts are still preserved in the Lake Tana monasteries. The monks still read them at dawn in Ge'ez, a language fewer than 2,000 scholars on earth can completely understand. The physical description remains in the text, and it has never matched a single painting created in the name of the man it describes. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Nature Mystery Unravel Mysteries, learn untold tales of history, and stay in the exciting world of new discoveries.